Two reasons for that. The Blitz, which I will talk about in a bit more detail later, and the Great Fire of London of 1666. Imagine there's a monument to I'm going to talk about this monument to the Great Fire of London, that big tall column. I'll talk about that in a second. I just need to do a little loop. So you have to imagine, well, firstly, the street layout, all these little narrow streets that you see, this hasn't changed in centuries. The street layout has not changed. But you have to imagine that all the buildings were timber frame buildings, straw roofs, thatched roofs, packed closely together down these little side streets. Where we are right now, say the River Thames was much wider than it used to be. You'll notice the road slopes upwards. The banks of the River Thames used to be a little to the right hand side, and on the banks of the River Thames were warehouses storing wines and brandies and tallows and lots of combustible materials. Heating and lighting, of course, back then was just naked flames. So you've got fantastic conditions for fires to start and spread. And fires were not uncommon. And on the 2nd of September 1666, the Great Fire of London started at Thomas Farriner's baker shop on Pudding Lane. So about 20 yards behind me is where the fire started. We're not quite sure how the fire started. Thomas Farriner swore blind, and he put the ovens out he was supposed to. So we're not quite sure how the fire started, but we know it started around about 2 o'clock in the morning. The mayor was woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning to be told of the fire, and the mayor was not happy about being woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. He rolled over, went back to sleep, and said that a woman might PISS it out. It was going to take a woman with an unfeasibly large bladder to put this fire out, because it burns for 3 days. Some books say 4 days, some books say 5 days. The summer of 1666 had been hot and dry, and there was a strong easterly wind blowing that night, so the fire is blowing from where we are now, from our right to our left, towards the west from the east. And ultimately it destroyed 13,000 houses, 89 of the 110 churches, the old St. Paul's Cathedral, the old Customs House. Didn't quite reach the Tower of London, because the wind was blowing in this direction, but there was the danger of the fire spreading to the Tower of London. But to stop the fire spreading any further, they used explosives to blow up a lot of houses to create a fire break. But the fire eventually, spread, destroying 340 acres. That's about 200 hectares, which was about 50% of London back in 1666. It didn't spread across the bridge to the south side. The official death toll was 6 people. In reality, it was going to be more. The estimated population of London at the time was 500,000 people. There's no mention of the homeless people or the prisoners in the jails, so it was going to be more than 6. But if 6 is correct, more people have died jumping from the top of the monument to the fire than actually died in the fire itself. So here is this big giant column up here on my right hand side, which is the monument to the Great Fire of London. This went up in 1677, so 11 years after the fire was out, the monument went up, and 303 feet, so it's 311 steps. I've forgotten the statistics, it's been so long since I've done a London tour. 311 steps, 202 feet, that's what I'm talking about. And there's a stairway in the middle of the column. There's like a balcony at the top if you wanted to stick your head out to have a look. There's a balcony at the top where you can get a nice view of London. But it was a suicide spot at one time. So I've got a little map here of London and how the fire spread. So we are on the north side of the River Thames, about here. That's London Bridge. We're about to go over London Bridge. There's the tower. So the fire started about here, and then there's the city walls there. So about 80% of what was within the city walls was burned down it did go a little bit beyond the city walls. We'll take this road a little bit later on, called Fleet Street, and I'll show you a couple of timber frame buildings that survived the Great Fire. And we haven't seen St Paul's Cathedral yet, but there's a St Paul's Cathedral there. So a man called Christopher Wren was asked to rebuild London. He said, yeah, what we'll do, we'll completely redesign the whole city. We'll have Italianate style piazzas, we'll do a grid system, create fire breaks. This is what we'll do. But once the fire was out, people started to move back into London, rebuild their lives from where they left off. So that's why the street plan has not changed in centuries. That's what we're supposed to be looking at. So the Great Fire of London, 1666. And there was a little nursery rhyme we learnt as kids. London's burning, London's burning. Fetch the engines, fire, 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 fire. Pour on water, pour on water. And there's another little nursery rhyme we learnt as kids, which we can sing as we go over this bridge, because this is London Bridge. All together now. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. Build it up with mud and clay, mud and clay, mud and clay. Build it up with mud and clay, my fair lady. Mud and clay will wash away, wash away, wash away. It goes on forever. We need to drive back and forwards across this bridge quite a few times. Just to put a downer on things, here on my right hand side a few years ago there was an Islamic extremist was shot dead by the police. Where those two people it was in this building here. So this is London Bridge. Say not very exciting, but it's functional. And then you can start to see skyscrapers to our left hand side to the east. That is Canary Wharf. So I say that's where the old docks used to be, a second financial centre for London. A nice view of the River Thames. In fact, they've put all sorts of restrictions on this bridge. It used to be 3 lanes wide. Now they've created a cycle lane, a bus lane, and they've even restricted traffic in weekdays. So we're lucky to be driving over it on Saturday. So this is the first time we ventured south side of the river. Look at all the people. What are they doing here? It was 20 odd years ago. They wouldn't have been here. But this south side of the river has 3 names on the sign at 11 o'clock to us. It says Borough and Bankside and Southwark. So the wider district is Southwark, spelt S-O-U-T-H, South, W-A-R-K, walk, it's pronounced Southwark. Oh, look at this. This is the little pedicycle here, where, you can have a drink and pedal away, having a beer. I'm not sure if they're allowed to drink or not on that.
The outside is 3 degrees or something too. Almost freezing. And so this is the south side of it. This is Borough and Bankside, and we're going to drive through Borough Market here. There's a lot of these carriages out here today. Very nice horses.
Yeah.
Very clean, very elegant.
Yeah, there's the Irish travelling community. So this is Borough. If we keep going straight down this road, we eventually come to Dover, in the southeast corner of England. I mean, this would have been the road the Romans took. Watling Street was the name of the old Roman road for here. And that bus must have just gone through a red light. Nice one. Thanks, Mr. Bus Driver. And so en route from here to Dover, you'll pass through Canterbury, and Canterbury being the sort of head of the church here in England. A long story behind why Canterbury is important in the Christian church in this country, but very quickly the Anglo-Saxons were pagans, and then the Pope decides he's going to convert us pagans to Christianity in 607 AD, and the Pope sends an envoy, a man called Augustine, to convert us pagans to Christianity. And the Augustine lands in Dover, comes inland to Canterbury, where he meets the King of Kent, a man called Ethelbert. Ethelbert is duly converted to Christianity. What's good for the king is good for the rest of the people, so Canterbury is the main site of Christianity in this country. And as another story about Canterbury Cathedral, where I'm spinning around here, where a man called Thomas Becket had a big row with the king at the time in the 12th century, and
became a bit of a thorn in the side of the king, did Becket, about reforms to the church. And the king is reputed to have said, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" And a few knights took this as a hint, went to Canterbury Cathedral, where they basically cracked open the skull of Thomas Becket. And almost instantaneously, Becket becomes martyred and a saint. And it was a major site of pilgrimage, Canterbury, towards the shrine of Thomas. And the most famous pilgrimage to Canterbury was a fictitious pilgrimage written by a man called Geoffrey Chaucer in the late 1300s. Tells of the tales of the pilgrims going to Canterbury to tell their story en route, called the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And if you're familiar with that book, it starts here. The pilgrimage starts here, about 2 blocks down to our right hand side at the Tabard Inn. So the start of the Canterbury Tales is in this part of London. On my left hand side is the hop exchange. So hops used in brewing. Ale, traditionally ale was beer brewed without hops. Beer just is, you know, malted barley, yeast, water, and then that is what beer brewed without hops was traditionally ale. And then the other great beer makers of the day, medieval times, were what is now the Belgians, people in Flanders, and they said to us, "Hey, try these. These are called hops. Put this in your ale, and it gives it a bitter taste, and it also acts as a preservative." And we never looked back since. On the southeast of England, in particular, grew lots of hops, and this is the hop exchange. Okay, it's not no longer used as the hop exchange. There's all sorts of offices in there now, but it's a nice old building with the little motifs of the hops. When I used to have a proper job, I used to be an environmental health officer, health inspector. One of the things I did was dealing with noise pollution, and in the basement of this building was a recording studio, and then it became a rehearsal room, and I was getting complaints from the other occupants of this building, and so I had to take formal action against the owners of the studios. There was a rock band called Thunder, upon whom I didn't actually serve the order on Thunder, I served it on the owners of the building. But I served a noise abatement notice because of the band of Thunder in this building here. So we're going to drive through Borough Market, and the market has been here for centuries. You could argue there's been a sort of market here ever since the Romans built their bridge. You can imagine the Romans coming from Londinium over the bridge, picking up supplies here, heading down to Dover. Officially, there's been a market here for about 400 years.
Whoa.
It is a wholesale fruit and vegetable market, and even today, if you come here on a weekday, you know, 4 o'clock in the morning, you're going to see lots of guys and girls picking up their fruit and vegetables to be delivered to wherever, hotels, etc. I say, when I used to work in this area, crumbs, 25 years ago now, there was nothing. These people wouldn't have been here 25 years ago. There was nothing for people here. It was just the wholesale fruit and vegetable market. But about the last 10, 12 years, they've been having this farmers market here, which at first was just Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and now it's every day. But still, Saturday is the busiest day. I said we could have found somewhere to eat here, but it's mostly sitting outside. Though. A lot of different food stalls, but there's nowhere to park for me here. So, but I mean, that would have been an option for lunch. But there's a million things to show you. So we'll drive through the market, and there's, but certainly when I used to work in this area, when it was, when it was, I say before the farmers market sprang up here. Yeah, certainly all the people down here.
Well, full of people.
It gave a chance for production companies to shoot lots of movies. So some of the movies shot around here include Bridget Jones's Diary. In fact, I will show you where Bridget Jones lives in a second. Harry Potter, in particular scenes from The Prisoner of Azkaban, and I say just under the railway bridge to my left-hand side was used as the entrance to the leaky cauldron in the Prisoner of Azkaban. Keep the Aspidistra flying, French Lieutenant's Woman, so lots of production comedy down here. That was when it was quiet, you know, before the farmers market came here. You probably wouldn't be able to do it now. Yes. There is also in this area Guy's Hospital is the tower block at 2 o'clock to us. Guy's Hospital, a comparatively new hospital, 250 years old, because there are older hospitals in London, and started by a man called Thomas Guy, who made his fortune in the South Sea bubble, indirectly connected with slave trade. And so with recent things going on, there's controversy about whether his statue will remain or not. This is connections with the slave trade. But we'll drive through the market here, and as I say, you know, 25 years ago, none of these people would be here. There was just closed on the side. Look, North Market stores to your right hand side here, and this is where Bridget Jones lives. Let me quickly show you the clip from the movie. So that door at 1 o'clock to us, 2 o'clock there. That's where Bridget Jones lived, if you've seen the movie.
Nice, yeah. It's very famous movie.
Let's have a look. Bridget clip.
And nice movie. I like it.
Yeah. There you go. That's the door there.
Ah, okay.
There's music to it, but I won't play the music because of a copyright issue. It's all copyright. Copyright. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, that's where Bridget Jones lives.
Yeah.
This was the second film. She's going off to see her boyfriend. Doesn't know what to wear.
Nice.
And then in the first film, there was a big fight scene that was all filmed here as well. That's all ahead of us, but the van's in the way. So loads of movies, and very quickly I will show you, because I might not be able to stop. I'm sorry, that's the big fight scene. And then Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban. Is that it? No. I'll show you this in a second when we drive past it, but triple-decker night bus comes here. That's the next street along. I'll show you in a second. And then this is the railway bridge we saw a minute ago, and that's the entrance to the leaky cauldron. That's all filmed around here as well. Let me put that there. Right, let's move on. Look at all the people. Well, it's good to see them back. I'm sure everyone's happy about it.
Yeah.
Actually, this was still open during the lockdown.
Yeah?
Well, I mean, it was a food place that provided food. It wasn't busy, obviously, because people weren't allowed
Not
to
so
play.
busy like now.
But, yeah, Saturday's the main day. Although, why they're charging... Look at all these people lining up for a donut. And they're charging something like £3 for a donut. Are you kidding me? £3 for a donut? You
Yeah.
get a pack of 10 for
Nice English
£3.
breakfast with this amount.
£4.50 for a donut.
Yeah.
£4.50 for a donut, and people are queuing up for it. Anyway, another church. Sorry, it's my moaning. Australians call us whinging poms. So basically, we complain a lot, which we do. And then £4.50 for a donut. Who's going to complain? Anyway, there's another big church here. This is Southwark Cathedral. So the Diocese of London on the north side. We haven't seen St Paul's yet. And this is the south side of the River Thames. This is the Diocese of Southwark. The origins of this church, it's mostly 13th century, this church, although it was remodeled or sort of improved in the early 20th century. There's a few US connections with this church. John Harvard, as in Harvard University, he was born not a stone's throw from where we are. He was baptized in this church. He went to Cambridge University here in England, then went over to what is now the United States, and studied, I think it was called Cambridge College, I think it was called. And he was a benefactor of Cambridge College, which then became Harvard University. Now, hopefully, they finished the little bit of repair around here. There is a little ship on my right-hand side called the Golden Hind, a 16th century galleon. Okay, this is a replica, but it was in the original ship of the Golden Hind that Sir Francis Drake circumnavigated the world. Not the first person to circumnavigate the world, that was Magellan, but Drake would have sailed around the world with like this crew of about something like 60 people on board a small ship like this. And if you've ever been to, you know, Cape Horn, was it Cape Horn in South America? Yeah. That's some pretty rough seas. It was bad enough on a 21st century ship. I was on a few years ago going to Antarctica. Imagine what it would be like today. So these are all warehouses. The River Thames is just on the other side of these buildings here. So these are old warehouses that have been converted. And when the church was all powerful back in medieval times and before the Reformation, and the church was all powerful, the bishops, the various bishops around the countries, all had London homes. And in my left-hand side is the remains of the London home of the Bishop of Winchester. Winchester is about 100 kilometres southwest of London, and this is the remains here of the palace. So this part of London, this was the Las Vegas of medieval London. This had all your gambling, all your brothels, the prostitution, criminal sanctuaries. This is where you came and had your fun, and it all went on with the blessing of, well, not so much the blessing, but you know, certainly the bishop was fully aware what was going on in this part of London because he took his percentage of the profits. But if you were really naughty in this part of London, you could end up in the clink. So I'm not sure if you've heard the expression "in the clink," meaning in jail. Well, the clink was a jail, and it was part of the Bishop of Winchester's palace, and it was in this location. It was the original clink. There's a small museum just behind me to the right called the Clink Prison Museum. It's been a long time since I've been there, but I really wouldn't waste me money in going there. I might go again just to see what it's like. This is all changing. Oh, a theatre for brands where retail. There used to be a big wine store here on my right hand side, but looks like it's changing again. So, but yeah, say 25 years ago, there was the market, the fruit and vegetable market, forget the farmer's market, and a few what we call greasy spoon cafes, just where, you know, the market workers could get their breakfast before heading home. But that was it. But now look at it; it's hugely popular, hugely popular. So yeah, looking good. Good to see people back. And say that Harry Potter clip, the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron, the railway bridge is, you can see the train going over just to the right, slightly out of view is where the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron was. Look at all the people, even at 10 to 4. Right, we've got another hour to get back to the hotel. Still many things to see.
Yeah.
Again, more movies shot around here. The Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels was another one. This cheese shop, oh, what's going on? Are they open? Oh, we are open next door. I'm slightly responsible for the cheese market being here. Would you like a piece of cheese? Can we try some of your cheese, please? Thank you. What is this?
Welcome cheddar from Somerset.
Oh, would you like a piece?
No, I have plenty.
No? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Nice shop inside.
Yeah. I'm sort of partly responsible for it being here. It was 25 years ago. I was dealing with planning applications. Put a planning application in for a cheese shop. And I thought, well, you might think a
nice
cheese
job
shop might not be noisy. I was dealing basically with noise pollution. But if you've got refrigerators going on all night and the compressors humming away all night, it could be a nuisance. Anyway, it's there now. And here are all my cheese jokes. There was an explosion at that cheese shop the other week. There was debris everywhere. Everywhere. And then that lady
few weeks ago, she just threw cheese at me one day. I walked past, she just threw cheese at me. I said, that's not very mature. I said, that's not very mature. I thought, how dairy. I thought, how dairy. What cheese would you use to disguise a very small horse? Mascarpone. I can't bear these jokes any longer. They're not very Gouda, these jokes. Okay.
Mascarpone.
This will put all your customers off from wanting to do a tour with. There's another little pub ahead of us called the Anchor. I'm not going to drive there. Again, this was used in a movie, the first Mission Impossible movie. Final scene where Tom Cruise and the character Luther are having a beer. That was filmed at the Anchor there, I say 25 years ago. Very little clientele in this part, and because there were still a few remains of industries and warehouses on the riverfront here, but within the last 20 years they've made like a riverside walk along the River Thames. So this area, say, was the Las Vegas of medieval London. Drunkenness, prostitution, gambling, but the biggest sin of all was, wait for it, the theatre. Oh yeah, the theatre. Yeah. Actors were the lowest of the lows. Not quite sure why that comes to be the case. I think it's because that the origins of theatre go back to feast days of saints, where they celebrated feast days of saints. You would get the apprentices in the various trades in London acting out scenes from the Bible or scenes from classical mythology, but a lot of these feast days ended up just being drunken brawls. So that's probably why actors were seen as immoral. But fast forward to around about the 1500s, if there were theatre groups that would travel the country, performing their plays wherever anybody would let them. So if you were wealthy enough, you could have them perform the play in your home, but typically in town squares, town halls, where you might perform a play. And these travelling theatre groups had to have some sort of sponsor, somebody that could vouch for these actors. Ultimately William Shakespeare's theatre group was sponsored by the king himself, known as the King's Players. But there were no purpose-built theatres. They travelled the country, and the first purpose-built theatres in London was on the north side of the River Thames to the east of the city wall, a place called Shoreditch. But they soon realised that's not the best place to have a theatre, because everyone was this side of the river having their fun. So they took down the first theatres on the north side of the river, brought them back this side, and the first theatre on this side of the river was the Rose. And there were 4 theatres ultimately on this side of the river: the Rose, the Hope, the Swan, and the more famous Globe Theatre. So there's a picture of how the area looked in the early 1600s. It says there the Globe, but we think that's the Rose, and we believe that this here is the Globe, and this was the site of the Globe. So, if we were coming along here in the 1600s, we're driving along this bit here. So we think that's the Globe there. It's just the site of the Globe. And it says there, that reads as bear baiting. Bear baiting. When bears were native in this country for entertainment and sport, you would capture a bear, because the theatres used to double up as bear baiting rings. You'd capture a bear, tie the bear down, and then release the dogs. And so you watch how the fight develops between the dogs and the bears. If you couldn't find a bear, you'd use a bull and see how the fight develops between the dogs and the bulls. So that was bull baiting. So the theatres used to double up as bear baiting rings. So the Globe Theatre, part owned by William Shakespeare, built in 1598, burns down in 1613. They did rebuild it, but it was the theatre was in a bit of a decline anyway by the early 1600s. Something called masks were becoming more popular, although that tended to be for wealthier people. Masks, theatre was entertainment for the poor people, really. And then we had the Civil War, and then Charles I had his head chopped off at the end of the Civil War. Then we're under the rule of Oliver Cromwell, who banned the theatre. So by the middle of the 1600s, all the theatres in this area had gone. Fast forward to the 20th century, American actor and producer called Sam Wanamaker he came to London in I think the 1930s as an actor. He came to this part of London looking for the site of the Globe Theatre, and all he found was a little plaque on the wall saying Globe Theatre was here. but he has a dream of rebuilding the Globe Theatre and putting on plays as Shakespeare would have done back in the late 1500s, early 1600s. And the result of his dream was finally unveiled in 97, 98. Now we can't see it from here, so you might need to get out if you really want to see this, because I can't really park here. But the result of his dream was this. To my left hand side, you're just catching a glimpse of a thatched roof here, a bit of a timber frame building just between the buildings here. It's like a thatched roof there. That's the 21st century reproduction of the Globe Theatre. I mean, it is an open air theatre. I can't park here, but if you wanted to go out and have a look, you can do. But the whole idea is to say put on plays as Shakespeare would have done. This is an open air theatre. That's the sky there. That's the roof we've just seen. And back in the day, you would stand to see the play. There are a few benches here which people could sit on, but this is the whole idea of the project, is to put on plays as Shakespeare would have done, to get that experience back in the same sort of experience you would have seen in the 16th century. I mean, a lot of the audience back in the 16th century would have been drunk and prostitutes and pickpockets. Hopefully they don't want to reproduce all of that experience, but that's the result of its stream. It's hugely popular. The theatre season runs from around April through to October. I say it's an open air theatre. Daylight today is going to be a bit cold, but you can see the people up there. It's all hugely popular there. And then about 7 years ago now, they opened up this red brick building called the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse. And there was an indoor theatre in the 16th, 17th century. I think it was called the Mermaid. And but of course, long before studio lighting that we have today, and so it was all done by candlelight, and that's what they've reproduced here. Understandably, a few severe restrictions on fire precautions, but you can see the poster there with the candlelight and the candelabras. So that's the idea of that, is to reproduce that experience. So the theatre's on this side, really. What's going on here with these? I don't know. And then also what we have on this side, let's say 25 years ago, some of these projects were mine. I was monitoring noise pollution. Not that there were many people to disturb around here, because it was mostly industrial in this part of the River Thames. More demolition, more luxury apartments going up, no doubt. But there's another item of interest in this area is this old power station, brick-built power station built in the 1930s, an oil-fired power station coming into view on my right-hand side here. Just quickly spin it around. This is an old power station, oil-fired. Obviously, oil was a more expensive fuel than gas and coal, so it shut down, particularly as its days were numbered when the oil crisis hit in the mid-70s. So the power station here eventually shut down in the 1980s, and it was just left on the banks of the River Thames doing nothing. And then about 25 years ago, the Tate thought, we'll take over this old power station and we'll convert it to a gallery. So there is in London 2 Tate galleries. A man called Henry Tate made his fortune in sugar back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was a big collector of art. When he died, he bequeathed his collection to the nation, and that is housed not too far from the House of Parliament. Probably won't get a chance to see it today, but we'll do our best. And it's mostly British art of the 19th century. But the collection itself grew and grew and grew and grew throughout the 20th century. They extended the existing gallery, and then they were in a dilemma by the 1990s. We've still got lots of art. Where can we display it? Do we build a new gallery? Do we extend the existing gallery again? And what they did, they took over the old power station, and in the year 2000 they opened up this, which is the Tate Modern. So it's the 20th and 21st century collection. So you've got works in there by Dali, Picasso, Georges Braque, free to go in. You can spend, spend a couple of days in there really. And then there's a little extension. I could have shown you the extension, but there's a car behind me. But they built an extension a couple of years ago, so you could easily spend
easily spend a day in there, if not more. So it's free to go in, and I say it's, I mean, a part of the regeneration of this part of London over the last 25 years. Again, it was another one of my projects, and I was watching it being built. They was going to put an elevator up where the chimney stack is and have an observation deck at the top. But what architects want to do and what engineers say is feasible is always a good debate. I remember talking to the engineers and they were going, the architects. The architects were Herzog and de Meuron from Switzerland, from Basel in Switzerland. Yeah. Wow, every time I look over my shoulder there's new apartments being built. Price of property in the country, average price of property in the country is about £260,000. It's going to be a lot higher in London. Average price of property in London is probably about £500,000 now. But even that, I'm talking about London as the big 1,580 square kilometres. So you'd still be lucky to find the nastiest studio in the nastiest part of London. You'd still be lucky to find anything for 150,000.
Yeah. On Nice Bridge 199, where my friend live, have apartment or like 300 square meter, 27 million pounds.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
You buy cheaper castle out of London, you know.
Yeah. Well, I live in the suburbs, typical 1930s house. A long story, but I went back to look after my mother in the beginning of 2020. She passed away in November, so I'm living there at the moment. I'll probably be there for the foreseeable future. I mean, I live alone. I've got this 3-bedroom house for myself. I don't need it.
Exactly.
But I had to get it valued for my mum's estate and paying inheritance tax. And they said £450,000. But if I sell it, I've got to give my brothers some of the money. But if I sell it, I get about £200,000. But I can't get
Not bad,
£200,000. I
Yeah.
can't buy anything for £200,000. But even if I £400,000, you know, I might be able to get a flat somewhere here. I mean, I've got to weigh up the advantages and disadvantages. So the disadvantages, although it's about 25 kilometres away, and today was good. Took me 50 minutes to get into London, but 2 hours
Usually
drive into London.
Wow.
You know, 3 to 4 hours a day just getting in and out of London. But I've got a house which I don't have to pay any rent on. I've got a garden. I've got somewhere to park the car. Because the closer to London you get, you know, fewer parking spaces, and if, as will happen, all cars go electric, you know, where am I going to charge it? So at the moment, for the foreseeable future, I'm stuck in the family home, the same house I was born in 56 years ago. So in some ways it's quite sad. I'm redecorating at the moment. So it hasn't been redecorated for about 20 years. So that's what I've been up to the last few weeks. Hey ho, life goes on, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing the last 2 years, just looking after my mother. That was horrendous.
She was sick?
Yeah.
How old was?
She was 86,
Wow.
but she had mobility problems, dementia, incontinence.
You were stuck with her, helping her.
Yeah, and then
And your brothers didn't help? No, huh? But they want to share the money.
So
This is-
anyway, I mean, the last 13 weeks she was in hospital, then in care. So, anyway, but say it went on too long. Right, I've got to, where am I going? I'm going to go right here, sorry, because I forgot to need to see St. Paul's Cathedral. Right, back to the London tours. Sorry about my life story, everybody.
No problem. It's
There's a little bit about price of property in London. So we're going over Blackfriars Bridge, and then coming into view time. Okay, we've got time to do this. Coming into view, St. Paul's Cathedral. That's the domed building at 2 o'clock to us. We'll go and take a quick look over there. And this church, well, the previous church burned down in the Great Fire of London of 1666. This one takes 35 years to build, designed by an architect. Well, it wasn't really an architect, it was just a scientist, but just took an interest in how buildings went up. So, you know, we would call him an architect today, but he was a bit of a polymath. Anyway, Christopher Wren builds it. Takes 35 years to build this. The very first church on this location, however, was consecrated in 607 AD. So 1400 years of Christian worship on this location. Evidence suggests there was a Roman temple here dedicated to Diana. If that is correct, that information, then 2,000 years of worship, whether it's pagan worship or Christian worship. Talk a little bit more about that in a second. This is Blackfriars Bridge. This part of London had a whole bunch of other, not monasteries, but friaries. Friaries and monasteries, much the same, religious houses. Difference between a monastery and a friary, simple differences. Generally speaking, monks in monasteries would stay in the monastery all day. The friars in the friaries would go out amongst the people, living a mendicant, what's called a mendicant life. Giving out prayers on the street corners, that sort of thing, in exchange for money. But at the Reformation, all these abbeys and monasteries and religious houses were shut down. Blackfriars, they were Dominicans. There were also Grey Friars who were Franciscans. So lots of different abbeys and friaries and monasteries around here. But it gives its name to this area where the Dominican friary was. And then this is Blackfriars Road Bridge, opened by Queen Victoria in 1870, I think it was. I can't remember the exact date, but it was about the first. There's Queen Victoria, back to Queen Victoria here. It was about the first public event she had after the passing of Albert. I mean, she went into mourning for the rest of her life, wasn't seen in public for about 7 years. But the first time she was seen in public was opening up Blackfriars Bridge. Near casualty of Brexit was Unilever. This building on the corner here is a Unilever building. Lever made their fortune in soaps, but they were going to move over to Europe. A nice little pub here in a Beaux Art style of architecture called the Blackfriar. There he is up on top of the building there, 174. There's the Blackfriar. So back in the city, say it's all commercial around here. A couple more churches, including with the blue flags flying at 12 o'clock to us. That's the Church of Scientology. But there were, go back to medieval London, and before the Great Fire of London, 110 churches within the City of London, within the business district, 110 churches. And the Great Fire of London destroyed 89 of the 110 churches. Sorry, I think the microphone's been rubbing against my phone, so it doesn't sound good. 89 of the 110 churches destroyed in the fire. 50 were rebuilt by Christopher Wren, and then as London grew, the church authorities here in the City of London were selling off churches, and with the profit to developers, and with profits from those sales, they were building new churches in the new suburbs. So gradually the number of churches came down, and then I'll talk about the Blitz in a second. But in the Blitz, nearly every church around here received some damage. Some were rebuilt, some were not rebuilt, and some were left in half a ruin. So we've got a grand total of about 36 churches in the City of London, the business district, in 1 square mile. And most of them are closed on a Sunday, or nobody lives around here. Again, I've got that cyclist there. There's nobody lives around here. According to the census, with Christianity under a bit of a decline, another reason why a lot of these churches are closed on a Sunday. However, they are open during the week to serve the spiritual needs of the working population should they need it. Some of these churches have recitals, or maybe a little talk about the history of London or something similar. So they are open during the week. And then some of these churches, they do let out their churches to different congregations. So it might not necessarily be an Anglican congregation, but that means they'd have to travel into this part of London for them. But the main church in this area is St. Paul's Cathedral, which is going to be coming into view as we swing around to the left. And as I say, 607 AD, first church consecrated. I'll show you a few pictures in a second of how things looked. The previous church burned down in the Great Fire of London, and then I say took 35 years to build this one, completed in 1710. What happens at St Paul's Cathedral? Well, first of all, a working church of the Anglican Communion, Church of England. It's a venue for weddings, royal weddings, yes, but very few royal weddings. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer got married here in 1981. And well, then off we go to the first of the red light. And the previous royal wedding to that was King Henry VIII had an elder brother called Arthur. Arthur was being primed to be the king, and he married Catherine of Aragon here. Not that they would recognise this church. So royal weddings, yes, very, very few. Funerals of, we've mentioned them already today. Lord Nelson, who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar 1805, he had his funeral here. He's also interred here. The Duke of Wellington, who finally defeats Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, had his funeral here and is interred here. Other people and other funerals that took place here. Winston Churchill's funeral in 1965 took place here. He's not buried here though. And similarly, Margaret Thatcher's funeral took place here in 2013. She too is not buried here. So funerals of important people. Other people that are buried here include Arthur Sullivan, one half of Gilbert and Sullivan, who wrote all those fantastic operettas. Who else is buried here? British artists such as Turner, Reynolds, William Holman Hunt, they're all buried here too. So
this is the main entrance, yeah?
This is the main entrance, yes, the western door. So if you remember Charles and Diana's wedding, there was a funeral there. I mean, there was the long train of Diana's dress, which pretty much covered all those steps there. It's a focus for national mourning, a focus for national celebration. So I say the Queen's going to celebrate her 70th year as a monarch tomorrow. There will be a Thanksgiving service here, like there was for her Silver Jubilee, 25 years, Golden Jubilee, 25 years, sorry, 50 years, Diamond Jubilee, 60 years. There'll be a Thanksgiving service. On more solemn occasions that are not funerals, then we've had, for example, memorial services to the victims of 9/11, memorial services to the tsunami back in Indonesia in 2004, whatever year that was. And then, if you remember, a few years ago, there was a fire in London in a tower block with 73 fatalities.
Oh, yeah.
Grenfell Tower, there was a memorial service.
Big disaster.
So, it's gone through a big clean-up recently. All this nice stone called Portland stone. Portland is to the south of England. It's a limestone. It was absolutely filthy. It's been exposed to London's air for 300 years. Anyway, it went a huge clean-up program inside and out, where they just clean the stone. Something like £40 million just to clean the stone. The previous church looked like this, big Gothic church. Took 200 years to build that. You might see old images of London with the spire off, which was struck by lightning, and that the whole church burned down the Great Fire of London. And Christopher Wren was asked to rebuild the church, and he said, okay, well, let's do something different. Let's build in a different style of architecture, because by this time the rest of Europe are building in classical architecture, copying what the Greeks and Romans did. And as usual, we here in England are much behind the rest of Europe. We are building still in Gothic. But Christopher Wren says, no, let's build in classical. So he said, I want to put a dome on my church. And the church authorities have said, no. No dome on no church. We are Anglican. We don't want our churches looking like no Catholic church. So a compromise was agreed with. That's what we're supposed to be looking at. It's got a bit of a dome plus a bit of a spire. But Wren took a few liberties on a clause in the contract that said he could make changes as he saw fit. But those changes were supposed to be ornamental, not structural. But we ended up with that anyway. So his iconic dome, there's actually three structures. The outer dome that we see, a brick cone that supports the cross and lantern, and then there's an inner dome which is painted with scenes from the life of St. Paul. 64,000 tons, supported on 8 pillars. The guy was a genius. I mean, they had to reinforce the pillars mainly because they were digging underground here. Anyway, so the church managed to survive the Blitz for various reasons. There's an iconic picture taken during the Second World War. I mean, London was bombed throughout the Second World War, but there's a period of incessant bombing of London known as the Blitz from September 1940 to May 1941. A period of incessant bombing of London, mostly concentrated to the east where the docks are strategic, bomb the supplies. But the city of London was important as well. Businesses were here, the money's here. And the worst night of the Blitz, as far as this area was concerned, was December the 29th, 1940, where the Nazis start to drop incendiary bombs on this area. And that night, this is the Bishop of London. This is Sarah Mullally. The lady on the bike. She lives in the house behind me. Mm-hmm. So they dropped something like the Nazis dropped something like 20,000 incendiary bombs on this area that night, and incendiary bombs basically set things alight. And it was a Sunday night, December the 29th, and just like a Sunday night is here, it's just dead around here because nobody lives around here.
Exactly.
So there was nobody to help put the fires out. But the firefighters who were here were desperately fighting the fires, and Winston Churchill gave the order to save St Paul's Cathedral. So you had all the firefighters retreating around St Paul's, and you also had a bunch of volunteers inside the church whose job it was to minimise damage to the church. Extinguishing incendiary bombs was fairly easy, and there's something like 30 plus incendiary bombs dropped on the church that night. But if it wasn't for the volunteers inside the church and the firefighters outside the church would have burned down. I know what people say, it's made of stone, it's not going to burn down. Well, yeah, but once these fires get hot enough, the stone's going to crack, and that's when the buildings collapse. And to give you some idea of the damage that was caused, that was the damage that was caused. I mean, it took a couple of direct hits later on in the war, but that was repairable damage. But all this damage was done by the fires. Mm-hmm. Another picture there, looking in a different direction. So that's St Paul's Cathedral, right? And let's see, what's time? 6:30. Let's get to the hotel. It's alright because it's also getting a bit light. So we're on top of a hill here called Ludgate Hill. I say the London's where it is mainly because of the geology of the land. It is noticeable about here that you can see we're on a slight hill here, but generally it's all flat around here, and this was the most convenient location for the Romans to build their city. So we're just leaving the old Roman city. In fact, there's a church on my right hand side called St Martin's within Ludgate, so within the gate that used to be here. So this would be about where the Roman city ended, or the wall. I can't see it from here, but if you turn right along this street, the street to my right side is called Old Bailey, and in the street called Old Bailey is the Central Criminal Court. Now everyone calls the courtroom the Old Bailey, but to be pedantic, it's the name of the street. But that's the main criminal court. There used to be the site of a jail called Newgate Jail, which had a courthouse. The jail burned down, but the courthouse remained, and so it's now home to the Central Criminal Court, which is where your big criminal trials have taken place of IRA terrorists, Islamic extremists over the years. Slightly out of view. This road left and right of us, we talked about this earlier on, it follows the line of the tributary called the River Fleet. It still exists, the River Fleet, but it's just basically a storm drain now, and so it still exists, but it was a natural western boundary, and it gives its name to this street here, Fleet Street, which was famous for newspapers. So the black glass building immediately on my right hand side, the building with a nice blue clock at 1 o'clock to us, is the old Telegraph building. The building with the dark glass behind me is the old Express building. A man called William Caxton introduced the printing press into this country in the 1470s. He had an apprentice, a man called Wynkyn de Worde. What a great name for a printer. Wynkyn de Worde set up his printing press somewhere around here, and so it became associated with printing and publishing this area of Fleet Street. Now the newspapers have long gone from here, sort of from the early 1980s. They moved away from the hot metal presses to more modern technologies. But today, when we talk about the printed media, we still refer to them as Fleet Street, even though they've long gone from here. So Fleet Street, famous for the newspapers, also famous for Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. So Sweeney Todd was a barber. You came to his barber shop, he gives you a haircut, he gives you a shave, but Sweeney Todd got over enthusiastic with the razor blade and would cut the throat of the customer as the customer sits in the chair. The customer bleeds to death. The chair was a special chair which tips up, and then the corpse, now drained of blood, falls out of chair through a trapdoor into the basement of the barber shop, never to be seen again. And next door to Sweeney Todd's barber shop was Mrs. Lovett's pie shop, who sold the tastiest, freshest meat pies in London.
Oh.
Where did she get the meat from? Yeah. Great story, not true. The forerunners of the tabloid press were known as penny dreadfuls. And anyway, it was a story that announced it a penny dreadful. That was another thing Fleet Street was famous for. Here on my left hand side is a timber frame building. This survived the Great Fire of London, this black and white stripy building. So the Great Fire of London's finished about here on its westward spread. There's a dragon in the middle of the road here, which indicates that we are leaving the city of London and we are now entering the city of Westminster again. And the whole block on my right hand side is occupied by the Royal Courts of Justice. These are the civil courts. This is where you come and sue people.
For divorcing.
Ordinarily, divorces could be settled out of court, but if it was a big divorce like Paul McCartney's divorce with Heather Mills, then that did actually arrive here at the civil courts here. Heather Mills McCartney, she got £24.3 million.
Not bad.
Yeah, she wanted more, but she didn't have a leg to stand on. Big civil cases here. I mean, there's three divisions. There's the family division, which would be things like divorce. Then there's the Court of Chancery and the Queen's Bench, which deal with things like probate, business law, things like that. So that's the civil courts there. I mean, 1880s, those courtrooms went up. There's another church over my right shoulder. This has been adopted by the Royal Air Forces there as their spiritual home. A couple of statues to my right hand side. The one closest to us is Hugh Dowding. He was in charge of fighter command during the Second World War and unsung hero. You know, he's largely responsible for defending this nation during what was called the Battle of Britain. It was his policy of trying to produce more and more fighter aircraft over bomber aircraft that arguably won the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940. The other statue, the portly figure, is Arthur Harris. He was in charge of bomber command. So it's been adopted by the Royal Air Force as their spiritual home. Australian High Commission immediately on my left hand side. For Harry Potter fans, the interior that doubled up as Gringotts Bank in the first Harry Potter movie. And then a lot of the buildings around here are occupied by the University of London. University of London encompasses things like King's College. Immediately to my right hand side is the London School of Economics. And then King's College occupies some of these buildings on my left hand side. This is the disadvantage of the car, is that got a red light. That's good. London School of Economics over my right shoulder, LSE, established by the Fabian Society. They were a left-wing think tank who want to see change, but change through gradual change rather than an abrupt change through a revolution. They want to see gradual change. Instrumental in setting up the LSE included George Bernard Shaw, the playwright. Famous alumni of LSE include Mick Jagger, although he didn't quite graduate because he went and did something else. Who else went there? JFK went there. And what I wanted to do was there's bound to have been famous Romanians that went there, and I meant to look up last night if any famous Romanians went there. So London School of Economics over my right shoulder, and then this building on my left with the nice columns is called Bush House. It's now occupied by King's College. So all part of the University of London. If you wanted to go to university 200 years ago, it was Oxford or Cambridge. If you wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge, you had to be male, single, and in the Church of England. So if you were Baptist, Methodist, Catholic, Jewish,
They don't accept you.
you could go, but you just couldn't graduate. You could study, but you just couldn't graduate officially. A bit crazy. These Christian denominations that weren't Church of England were known as non-conformists. And a bunch of non-conformists decided to start their own college in London, which was University College, not that far from here. And then in competition, the King, under King George IV, and the Duke of Wellington set up King's College in competition to University College. But by the end of the 1830s, they became friends and started the University in London. So the University in London now comprises of about 15, 16 or so different institutions, including University College, King's College, LSE, biggest university in this country, but it's not one campus, it's So this is a bit of the theatre district here. You can see a few more theatres around here. Mamma Mia over my right shoulder. Also Frozen, hugely popular. And
I was Lion Kings
Lion
maybe
King is-
10 years ago, you know. It's still in
I've got I want to be in that lane there.
Lion King.
Too late now. That's okay.
Yeah.
We'll go over Waterloo Bridge anyway. We've got a bit of time to do this. Lion King is over my
Uh-huh.
over 1 o'clock to us, 2 o'clock.
Yeah,
to us.
I saw it.
That's in a theatre called the Lyceum Theatre, and Lyceum Theatre is where John Lennon made his last ever performance in England with the Plastic Ono Band in December 1969. When you hear "No Woman No Cry" on the radio by Bob Marley, that was recorded at the Lyceum Theatre in 1974. I've been forced to drive over Waterloo Bridge, but it's not a problem because, hey, look at the view of London from Waterloo Bridge. It's the best view of London. The city of London, the business district to my left-hand side, city of Westminster, and now the scaffold is come off of the clock tower. It's looking fantastic. What a great view. And I say the clock tower, £80 million refurbishment. It's all been re-gilded and everything. It's looking, well, you can see from here, it's just all sparkly and new. I'm just waiting for the clock to read the correct time. In fact, those two clock faces are reading the correct time. It's just that when we were looking at it earlier on, there was two clock faces not correct. So unless they've corrected them now, I don't know. Anyway, I digress. I pointed this out from the other side of the river. This is the South Bank complex. I say that immediately on my left is the National Theatre. There are actually 3 theatres in the building to my left, and actually this way, of varying sizes. And then there's various exhibition centres to my right hand side, Hales Gallery. Another part of King's College is the beigey colour building at 11 o'clock to me. It's where my friend Sean works. He's into pollution. He was also the bass player in our band. But that building used to be the government chemist, and I used to work in that building when I left school at 18. I used to work in that building for about 3 years. Giant IMAX movie theatre immediately occupies the middle of this junction. It's been here about 20 years now. This is Waterloo. I say the battle. It's built. This area is named to commemorate the Battle of Waterloo of 1815, and the Battle of Waterloo takes place in just south of Brussels, in today Belgium. But the rail terminus here would take you to the south of England, Southampton, and the suburbs. Sometimes I get my train back home from here. Let's go over Westminster Bridge. That would be the best bridge to go over, I think. On the way back, I don't really need to do the Strand. So they put all these new apartments up, but if you had any of these apartments here, when you look out, you just leap into that building. It's not a riverside view.
Yeah, but the position, they don't care, you know, they are looking for position to be...
Yeah, mostly being bought up by the Russians with the proceeds of organised crime, allegedly.
The price is crazy, you know. Normal people cannot touch. You need to be billionaire to pay
London Eye, again, coming into view as we pass through this junction. So I say it's it was the highest in the world. It's built 135 metres, overtook the one in Yokohama. But we've subsequently got higher ones in the world, one in Singapore Flyer. And this one's been here 22 years already. Don't believe it. 32 capsules, each capsule can take up to 25 people. I've never been inside it with 25
I was twice, and I was in the first year when they opened, you know.
And you can get married in the London Eye. There is, I mean, you can get married at a church, obviously. Anywhere with a license that can hold marriages. So hotels, for example, you can get married in various places now. But London Eye, you can get married in that. All the buildings to my right-hand side, County Hall. This was the Town Hall for London. So we mentioned the glass testicle earlier on, which is the present Town Hall for London. County Hall behind me was the Town Hall for London until 1986, I think it was. And I mean, there's been a sort of London-wide government since the 19th century with big projects. It started life as the Commissioner for Works, I think it was called, and big projects like the sewage system I talked about. Then it was known as the London County Council, then it was known as the Greater London Council, and now it is known as Greater London Authority, GLA. The blue archway to my left-hand side is all part of Waterloo Station, but this specifically was built for the Eurostar. So the Eurostar is the train that goes from London to Paris, and the first services were 30 years ago, about 92 I think it was. The first services. The tunnel, I remember the news item when they were digging the tunnel from the French side to the English side. I remember them meeting under the English Channel, and then the first trains went through about 30 years ago. But originally the terminus was here at Waterloo, and then they moved it to St Pancras on the north side of the River Thames. So this is Westminster Bridge, and as I say, with the clock tower. Now the scaffolding is coming down, it's looking mighty fine. Look at that. I mean, the whole building needs overhaul. Also, quickly should have mentioned the hospital on my left-hand side. This is St Thomas's Hospital. The origins of the hospital go back to an infirmary, to a monastery. Florence Nightingale set up the School of Nursing here, and then another fine lady called June Almeida was working on electron microscopy here at St Thomas's Hospital, and she was using electron microscopy to look at viruses, and she notices that certain viruses had like a halo around them, and the Latin for halo is corona. So the first coronaviruses, I'm not sure if you've heard of coronaviruses, but the first coronaviruses were identified by this lady called June Almeida. Of course, her peers poo-pooed her research because she was a woman. But then they soon realised, oh no, she's found something new. So the first coronavirus is identified at St Thomas's Hospital. Going back to Parliament, the whole building, I say, is about 150 years old now, and the clock tower itself just went through an £80 million refurbishment. That was just the clock tower. But I say, when this building was built, long before electricity and long before telephones and computers, over the years, as technology improves, they would put in new plumbing, new wiring, but they didn't strip out the old wiring. And there was a little news report a few years back with the maintenance manager going down and saying, look, I've got all these wires here, I don't know what the heck are they supposed to do. And the old sewage system from the when it was built, still in operation. I'm not quite sure what the Penguins are doing.
Penguins, yeah.
But the whole building, they reckon about £4 billion worth of repairs and improvements. To be honest, the building's not fit for purpose, but what do you do with this iconic building, this sort of symbol of parliamentary democracy, for all the good and bad it has? Personally, I'd say I'll pay another couple of pounds on my tax to have the building repaired, even though it's not fit for purpose. But there's 650 MPs plus their staff plus the 800 lords. There's not enough space in the whole building for them, so this building on my right hand side here is like an overspill of offices and committee rooms. So yes, spring is on its way. The nights are getting lighter, which is good. As you know. No, just stick with plan A. We'll go up Whitehall through Trafalgar Square. Yeah, so again, well, no, they haven't changed the clock face here. The time on the clock face here yet. Yeah, so back along Whitehall, so it's all government buildings along here, and so when you're driving along, a lot of things to point out. The National War Memorial called the Cenotaph, 12 o'clock to us in the middle of the road, with the flags flying. It's our National War Memorial, went up in 1920. At the same time, they buried the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey, designed by a man called Lutyens. Cenotaph means empty tomb. So, I mean, it's used throughout the year for various commemorations, but the main event is the Sunday closest to the 11th of November. This is Downing Street again on my left-hand side where the Prime Minister lives. And those gates were up in the 1980s, but you used to be able to walk along that road there. All the government buildings, I say the Cabinet Office on my left, the Scotland Office with the blue doors on my left-hand side. Today, England plays Scotland in the rugby. That's at 5 o'clock. I think. Ordinarily, I'd be in the pub watching it, but I'm grateful for the work today.
Yeah.
There's a little building on my right-hand side called the Banqueting House. Now, as I said, there used to be a palace here called Whitehall Palace. Most of Whitehall Palace burned down in the 1690s. This Banqueting House, as you can guess, was a banqueting house. Built in the early 1600s by a man called Inigo Jones. If you're into art history, the ceiling was painted by artist Rubens. This is where the horses were earlier on. You usually see them from 10 o'clock till 4 o'clock, but that's where the horses were earlier on. And these scooters are becoming a bit of a pain in the backside. See, they're not legally supposed to be on the road, but they're not legally supposed to be on the sidewalk either. There's a bit of an anomaly with these, but certainly going through a red light would not be acceptable. This building on the left used to be again, the part of the Admiralty. There's a few clues on the building. There's like little fishes and anchors and that sort of thing. It still is used by the government, but not as the Navy or Admiralty. And then, as Scotland Yard was the name of the street in which the first police station was on. So there's Scotland Yard to my right-hand side of the street. Back into Trafalgar Square. I think I've done Trafalgar Square to death, but then we get a better view of Lord Nelson. I say he was killed at the Battle of Trafalgar, but I've also mentioned that he's buried in St Paul's Cathedral. Now you're probably thinking, well, hang on a minute, this was 200 years ago, and surely if he's buried in St Paul's Cathedral and Trafalgar's over by, Gibraltar, didn't he smell when they brought him home? Surely he would have decomposed a bit. Well, yes, he did smell, but he smelled of alcohol, because when he died, they bundled him into a barrel of brandy on board his ship when they brought him home, and then they buried him. About 3 months after he passed, he was fatally wounded.